The cruelest invitations are the ones disguised as kindness. The message arrived on a quiet Thursday afternoon while Naomi Carter was finishing her shift at a small community arts center on the south side of Chicago. The screen of her phone glowed with a familiar name she had not seen in nearly 3 years. Ethan Brooks. For a moment, she simply stared at it. Outside the window, traffic rolled past in the fading sunlight, and somewhere down the street, a siren echoed between brick buildings. Naomi opened the message. Ethan was hosting a gala at the Grand Monarch Hotel, one of the most exclusive venues in the city. Business leaders, investors, local celebrities, everyone important would be there. And somehow, he wanted her to attend. The invitation looked polite. Respectful, even. But Naomi knew Ethan too well. She remembered the way he used to smile before saying something that left a mark long after the conversation ended. She remembered how easily he could turn charm into humiliation. Still, she clicked accept. Saturday night arrived wrapped in cold autumn air. The city skyline glittered like scattered diamonds against the darkness as black SUVs lined the entrance of the hotel. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast warm golden light across marble floors. Laughter floated through the ballroom. Champagne glasses clinked softly. Naomi stepped through the revolving doors alone. Her black dress was elegant but simple. No designer logo. No expensive jewelry. No attempt to impress anyone. The hostess checked her name and offered a polite smile before directing her toward the ballroom. As Naomi entered, conversation slowed. Eyes shifted toward her. Some guests recognized her immediately. Others only recognized the expression people wore when they looked at her. Curiosity. Judgment. Pity. Across the room stood Ethan Brooks. His tailored tuxedo fit perfectly. Investors surrounded him. His new girlfriend rested comfortably at his side. Ethan looked successful. Powerful. Untouchable. Then he noticed Naomi. A slow smile appeared on his face. Not the smile of a man happy to see an old friend. The smile of a man whose plan was unfolding exactly as expected. Naomi felt dozens of eyes moving between them. The divorced wife. The successful ex-husband. The story everyone thought they already understood. Ethan lifted his champagne glass toward her from across the ballroom. The crowd watched. Naomi simply nodded. Calm. Silent. Unreadable. What nobody in that room knew was that before the night ended, a secret buried for decades was already on its way to that ballroom, and the name written inside Billionaire's final will was about to change everything. Naomi could feel the weight of the room long before anyone said a word. It was in the quick glances that lasted half a second too long. It was in the polite smiles that never reached people's eyes. It was in the way conversations paused whenever she walked past a cluster of guests and magically resumed the moment she moved on. The ballroom sparkled with wealth. Crystal glasses reflected golden light across white tablecloths. Water smoothed gracefully through the crowd carrying silver trays filled with appetizers most people could not pronounce. A jazz band played softly near the stage. Everything looked perfect. Yet Naomi felt like she had stepped into a room that had already decided who she was. Near one of the tall windows overlooking the Chicago River, two women whispered while pretending to admire the skyline. Naomi caught only fragments. Divorced. Unfortunate. Such a shame. She looked away before they noticed she had heard them. Years ago, comments like those would have followed her home. They would have echoed in her head while she lay awake at night. Not anymore. Life had taught her something valuable. Most people judged what they could see. Very few cared enough to learn the truth. Across the ballroom, Ethan was enjoying every second of the attention. A group of executives surrounded him, laughing at his stories. Every few minutes someone shook his hand. Someone else congratulated him. The image was carefully constructed. Success. Confidence. Achievement. Ethan always understood the power of appearances. Naomi remembered when they were younger and struggling to pay rent on a small apartment. Back then, she had believed success meant building something together. Ethan believed success meant being admired. Looking at him now, she realized neither of them had changed as much as people thought. A voice suddenly interrupted her thoughts. Naomi. She turned and saw an older man approaching with cautious recognition in his eyes. For a moment she struggled to place him. Then she remembered. Daniel Harper. One of Ethan's former mentors from years ago. His gray hair was thinner now, but his warm smile had not changed. It has been a long time, he said. Naomi nodded. Longer than it feels. Daniel studied her face carefully. You seem different. Naomi smiled softly. Most people say that when they cannot figure out what happened to someone. Daniel laughed quietly. Before he could respond, movement near the stage caught everyone's attention. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly. A spotlight illuminated the podium. Ethan adjusted his jacket and began making his way forward as applause rolled across the room. Naomi watched him climb the steps. His expression carried the confidence of a man who believed the night belonged to him. What she did not notice was a man standing near the ballroom entrance holding a sealed leather folder. He checked his watch, scanned the room once, and quietly stepped aside as if waiting for the exact right moment. The applause began before Ethan even reached the podium. It rolled through the ballroom in steady waves, growing louder as he stepped into the spotlight. The giant screen behind him displayed photographs from the past year. Business conferences. Charity events. Magazine covers. Every image told the same story. Ethan Brooks had become someone important. Naomi stood near the back of the room with a glass of sparkling water resting lightly in her hand. She watched the crowd rise to celebrate him. Some people clapped because they admired him. Others clapped because everyone else was doing it. The difference was often smaller than people liked to admit. Ethan adjusted the microphone and smiled. Thank you, everyone. Tonight means more than I can put into words. The audience responded with warm laughter and more applause. He spoke confidently about growth, ambition, and opportunity. He thanked investors. He thanked business partners. He thanked mentors who had guided him. His voice filled the ballroom effortlessly. Years earlier, Naomi had helped him practice speeches in a tiny apartment kitchen. She used to sit at the counter while he rehearsed every line. Back then, success had been a distant dream. Tonight, it stood under bright lights wearing a custom tuxedo. Ethan paused dramatically before continuing. People often ask me what the secret is. More laughter. More attention. The truth is simple. Sometimes success begins the moment you stop holding on to things that are holding you back. Several guests nodded knowingly. Naomi noticed a few faces glance toward her. The message was not subtle. Ethan continued speaking, never using her name. He did not have to. There are people who belong in your future and people who belong in your past. Learning the difference can change your life. This time the reaction was stronger. Smiles spread across the room. Some guests exchanged looks. Others quietly enjoyed the discomfort they assumed Naomi must be feeling. Ethan's girlfriend laughed softly beside the stage and squeezed his hand when he looked her way. The gesture drew more attention. Naomi felt dozens of eyes drifting toward her again. Yet her expression never changed. She simply stood there, calm and composed. The only sign of tension appeared in the slight movement of her thumb against the side of her glass. Daniel Harper noticed it. Standing nearby, he lowered his eyes briefly before looking back toward the stage. Even he seemed uncomfortable now. Ethan finished another story about overcoming obstacles. The crowd rewarded him with applause. Then he looked directly across the ballroom. For a second, his gaze locked onto Naomi's. A small smile appeared. Victorious. Certain. As though he had finally proven something. Naomi met his eyes without looking away. She did not smile back. She did not react at all. That seemed to confuse him more than any argument could have. The silence between them lasted only a moment before movement near the entrance drew attention away from the stage. The man with the leather folder had returned. This time he was not alone. Too sharply dressed. Attorneys entered behind him, followed by several senior executives whose faces were immediately recognized by some of the wealthiest people in the room. Conversations began to fade. Heads turned. Even Ethan stopped speaking for a moment. Something unexpected had just arrived, and whatever it was, it clearly had nothing to do with his carefully planned celebration. The room changed before anyone spoke. One moment the ballroom had been focused entirely on Ethan. The next, attention drifted toward the unexpected visitors standing near the entrance. The attorneys carried themselves with the quiet confidence of people who never needed to announce their importance. Their dark suits were perfectly tailored. Their expressions revealed nothing. Beside them stood several executives whose faces appeared regularly in financial magazines and business news broadcasts. Even guests who did not recognize their names understood they were watching powerful people enter the room. Ethan recovered quickly. He smiled and stepped away from the microphone. "It looks like we have some unexpected guests tonight," he said lightly, drawing a few nervous laughs from the audience. Yet beneath the smile, uncertainty had begun to appear. The lead attorney exchanged a brief glance with one of the executives but made no move toward the stage. Instead, he remained near the entrance as though waiting for something. Or someone. Naomi watched quietly. A strange feeling settled in her chest. Not fear. Not excitement. Something closer to recognition. As if a memory she had forgotten years ago was gently knocking on a locked door. The attorney's leather folder caught her attention. Something about it seemed familiar. Then, without warning, an image surfaced from the back of her mind. A rainy afternoon almost 4 years earlier. Naomi had been sorting through mail after returning home from work. Bills. Advertisements. Community newsletters. And one unusual envelope. Thick cream-colored paper. No company logo. No return address she recognized. She remembered holding it beneath the kitchen light while rain tapped softly against the apartment windows. Ethan had barely looked up from his laptop when she mentioned it. Probably marketing junk, he had said. Naomi almost threw it away. But curiosity convinced her to open it. Inside was a letter from a law firm in New York City. The message was brief and formal. They requested a confidential meeting regarding a matter of family importance. No details. No explanation. Only a phone number and a signature. Naomi remembered laughing at the absurdity of it. Family importance? She knew her family history. Or at least she believed she did. Her mother had raised her alone in a small neighborhood on Chicago's South Side. There had been no wealthy relatives. No hidden connections. No mysterious family branches waiting to be discovered. Ethan had laughed too. Sounds like somebody made a mistake. Naomi eventually folded the letter and placed it inside a kitchen drawer. Weeks passed. 10 months. Life became busy. The meeting never happened. Eventually she forgot about it completely. Standing inside the ballroom now, Naomi suddenly remembered every detail. The cream-colored envelope. The elegant signature. The New York law firm. Her fingers tightened slightly around her glass. Across the room, the lead attorney opened the leather folder and quietly reviewed several documents. The action lasted only seconds, yet Naomi felt her pulse quicken. Somewhere deep inside, a forgotten piece of her past had begun moving again. And for reasons she could not explain, she sensed that whatever was about to happen had started long before tonight. Years before anyone in the ballroom had ever heard Naomi Carter's name, another story had been unfolding hundreds of miles away in New York. It happened behind private office doors, inside conference rooms overlooking Manhattan, and across quiet conversations that never appeared in newspapers. Charles Whitmore, founder of Whitmore Global Holdings, had spent decades building one of the largest business empires in the country. His investments stretched across technology, real estate, transportation, and energy. Financial networks called him a visionary. Business magazines called him a legend. Yet the people closest to him knew there was one thing money had never been able to buy back. Family. As the years passed, Charles became increasingly private. Public appearances grew rare. Interviews almost disappeared. Rumors circulated through corporate circles, but very few people knew the truth. Nearly 30 years earlier, a relationship from his youth had ended before he understood its consequences. By the time he learned what had happened, the trail had already gone cold. For decades, he searched quietly. Investigators were hired. Records were reviewed. Leads appeared and vanished. Names surfaced and disappeared. Most searches ended the same way. Dead ends. Then one afternoon, everything changed. A private investigator delivered a report containing a name. Naomi Carter. The information was incomplete. The evidence was not yet conclusive. But for the first time in years, there was a possibility. Charles ordered a deeper investigation. More documents were collected. More connections were verified. The picture slowly became clearer. Meanwhile, Naomi lived her life completely unaware that powerful people were tracing a path toward her. She worked. She paid bills. She rebuilt herself after disappointments. She never imagined that strangers in New York knew more about her family history than she did. Back in Chicago, the memory continued unfolding in Naomi's mind as she watched the attorneys near the ballroom entrance. Another forgotten detail surfaced. A second letter. It had arrived almost 6 months after the first one. This time the message had been more direct. The law firm requested a meeting regarding confidential family records and potential inheritance matters. Naomi remembered staring at those words in disbelief. Potential inheritance matters sounded ridiculous. Ethan had dismissed it immediately. If somebody wants to leave you millions of dollars, they can find you without sending mysterious letters. He had laughed at his own joke. Naomi remembered laughing too. Looking back now, she wondered why she never called the number. Perhaps life had simply been too busy. Perhaps she had convinced herself that extraordinary things happened only to other people. Across the ballroom, Ethan resumed casual conversation with several guests, pretending the unexpected. Arrivals did not concern him. But Naomi noticed the occasional glance he directed toward them. Curiosity was beginning to replace confidence. Near the entrance, one of the attorneys quietly checked his watch again. Then he looked directly across the room. For the briefest moment, his eyes settled on Naomi. Not Ethan. Not the executives. Not the investors. Naomi. The attorney gave a subtle nod to one of his colleagues. Whatever they had come to do tonight, she suddenly realized with growing certainty that it had something to do with her. The energy in the ballroom had shifted so completely that even the music seemed quieter. Conversations that had filled the room only minutes earlier had dissolved into cautious whispers. Guests who had spent the evening competing for attention were now watching the attorneys near the entrance. Nobody understood why they were there. Nobody wanted to be the first to ask. Ethan stepped down from the stage and approached one of the executives with practiced confidence. Naomi could not hear every word, but she noticed the polite smile on Ethan's face slowly tightening as the conversation continued. Whatever answer he received was not the one he expected. The executive shook his hand, offered a brief response, and moved away without further explanation. For the first time that evening, Ethan looked uncertain. Near the back of the room, Daniel Harper quietly joined Naomi beside the window. He kept his voice low. Do you know what this is about? Naomi stared at the attorneys. I was about to ask you the same question. Daniel studied her expression carefully. You look like you have seen a ghost. Naomi almost laughed. Not a ghost. Used to memory I thought did not matter. Before Daniel could respond, one of the attorneys began moving through the crowd. Guests instinctively stepped aside to make room. The room became silent enough for the sound of shoes against marble floors to echo beneath the chandeliers. The attorney was not heading toward Ethan. It was not heading toward the stage. It was walking directly toward Naomi. Every step seemed to draw more attention. Conversation stopped entirely. Even the servers carrying trays paused to watch. Naomi felt dozens of eyes turning toward her. The attorney finally stopped a few feet away and offered a respectful nod. Ms. Carter? His voice was calm and professional. Naomi nodded slowly. Yes. The attorney opened the leather folder. Several documents rested neatly inside. My name is Richard Bennett. I represent Whitmore Family Holdings. The name landed like a stone in still water. Naomi recognized it immediately. Whitmore. The same name from the letter she had ignored years ago. Richard continued. Ms. Carter, I apologize for approaching you in this manner. We have been attempting to reach you for some time. Around them, whispers spread rapidly through the ballroom. Whitmore was not just another company. It was one of the largest private business empires in the country. People knew the name. Ethan knew the name too. Naomi could see it in his face as he moved closer through the crowd. Richard glanced briefly at the room before returning his attention to Naomi. There are important matters that require your presence this evening. Naomi blinked. My presence? Richard nodded. Yes, ma'am. She looked around at the ballroom full of strangers watching every reaction. I think you may have the wrong person. For the first time, Richard allowed himself a small smile. Respectfully, Ms. Carter, that is the one thing we are absolutely certain about. The room fell silent again. Somewhere near the stage, a champagne glass touched a table with a soft click. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. And standing in the center of a ballroom that had spent the entire night overlooking her, Naomi suddenly realized she had become the most important person in the room. The silence that followed seemed to stretch across the entire ballroom. Naomi stood facing Richard Bennett while hundreds of eyes remained fixed on her. Only an hour earlier she had entered the event as an afterthought, someone people whispered about before returning to more important conversations. Now nobody was looking anywhere else. Richard carefully removed the document from the leather folder. The paper itself appeared ordinary, but the attention surrounding it made it feel heavier than stone. Ethan finally stepped forward. Excuse me, he said with a polite smile that sounded increasingly forced. Perhaps this discussion would be better handled privately. Richard turned toward him respectfully. Ordinarily, I would agree. He paused briefly. However, the circumstances surrounding this matter require witnesses. The answer immediately raised more questions than it resolved. A tense smile faded. Around the room, guests exchanged confused glances. Richard looked back at Naomi. Ms. Carter, before we proceed, there is something you should know. Naomi nodded slowly. Her pulse had become impossible to ignore. Richard's voice remained calm. 3 days ago, Charles Whitmore passed away peacefully at his residence in New York. The room reacted instantly. Gasps spread through the crowd. Several people placed hands over their mouths. Others stared in disbelief. Even those who had never met Charles Whitmore understood the significance of the announcement. A man whose name shaped entire industries was gone. Naomi felt a strange sadness settle over her. She had never met him. Yet somehow the news felt personal. Richard continued. Prior to his passing, Mr. Whitmore left specific legal instructions concerning the reading of his final testament. The attorneys standing behind him exchanged brief looks before opening additional folders. Documents were placed neatly across a nearby table. Every movement appeared precise. Rehearsed. Important. Ethan's girlfriend whispered something into his ear, but he barely seemed to hear it. His attention never left Naomi. Richard glanced toward the assembled executives. Several offered subtle nods. Then he returned his attention to the room. Mr. Whitmore dedicated many years to searching for a member of his family. More whispers erupted throughout the ballroom. Naomi's heart skipped. Family. The word echoed against memories she had spent years ignoring. The letters. The unanswered phone calls. The requests for meetings she never attended. Richard continued. The search lasted decades. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The ballroom had become a courtroom of curiosity. Evidence was gathered. Records were verified. Independent investigations were conducted. Naomi felt Daniel Harper step slightly closer beside her. Not to interfere. Simply to offer quiet support. Richard looked down at the document in his hands. Then he raised his eyes. The identity of the individual connected to those investigations was legally confirmed. A sharp breath escaped somewhere in the crowd. Ethan's jaw tightened. Naomi could hear her own heartbeat now. Richard carefully closed the folder without revealing the final page. The complete declaration will be read shortly. Confused murmurs spread through the room. Shortly. Not now. Richard seemed completely unfazed by the growing tension. Until then, Ms. Carter, we respectfully request that you remain present. Naomi stared at him. Every instinct told her the answer to a question she had never thought to ask was only moments away. And for the first time in her life, she realized that the truth about her past was waiting in the same room as her future. The entire ballroom seemed to stop breathing. Richard Bennett stepped forward once more, carrying the final document in both hands. No music played. No glasses clinked. Even the city lights beyond the tall windows appeared distant now, as if the world outside had paused to listen. Naomi stood perfectly still. She could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips. Across the room, Ethan watched with narrowed eyes, his earlier confidence fading beneath growing uncertainty. Richard unfolded the final page. The sound of paper moving through the silence felt impossibly loud. Under the instructions of Charles Whitmore, he began, all findings regarding family succession were reviewed, verified, and legally confirmed through independent investigation, historical records, and genetic documentation. A murmur swept through the crowd before quickly disappearing again. Richard continued. The succession committee unanimously recognized one surviving direct heir. Naomi's throat tightened. Every memory returned at once. The unanswered letters. The forgotten requests. The opportunities she had dismissed because they seemed impossible. For years, she had believed those messages were mistakes. For years, she had assumed she was ordinary. Richard lowered his eyes briefly to the document. Then he spoke the name. Naomi Carter. Nobody moved. Nobody reacted. For one stunned second, the room seemed unable to process what it had heard. Then the silence shattered into gasps. Several guests exchanged looks of disbelief. Others simply stared at Naomi as though seeing her for the first time. Daniel Harper closed his eyes and quietly shook his head in amazement. Ethan's face lost all color. His expression froze somewhere between confusion and disbelief. Naomi herself barely heard the whispers spreading around her. Her mind had become strangely calm. The answer she never expected had finally arrived. Richard continued speaking. As the sole confirmed heir, Ms. Carter inherits controlling ownership interests established under the Whitmore succession structure. The words echoed through the ballroom. Controlling ownership. Soler. Whitmore. Some guests immediately understood the scale of what that meant. Others began pulling out phones beneath the tables. Executives standing near the entrance exchanged respectful nods. To them, the announcement was not shocking. They had known before entering the room. Naomi looked toward the windows overlooking Chicago. The city lights reflected softly against the glass. Used hours earlier she had walked into the ballroom carrying nothing except her dignity. Now people were looking at her differently. Not because she had changed. Not because she had become someone new. Because a truth hidden for decades had finally stepped into the light. Richard carefully closed the document. Amy Carter, he said gently, Charles Whitmore spent years hoping he would have the opportunity to meet you. Naomi lowered her eyes for a moment. A quiet sadness passed through her. They had found each other too late. Yet somehow, in that same moment, she understood something important. This was never about money. It was about belonging. And while the room struggled to absorb the announcement, Ethan slowly realized that the woman he had spent the entire evening trying to diminish was now standing at the center of a legacy far greater than anything he had ever imagined. For several long seconds, nobody knew what to say. The ballroom that had been filled with whispers, laughter, and carefully rehearsed conversations now stood silent beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. Naomi remained exactly where she was, her hands relaxed at her sides. She was not smiling. She was not celebrating. She was simply standing still, absorbing a truth that had taken decades to find her. Around the room, people began looking at her differently. Not with pity. Not with judgment. With respect. The kind that appears when assumptions collapse all at once. Ethan finally stepped forward. The confidence that had carried him through the evening was gone. His expression had softened into something unfamiliar. Regret. Naomi, he said quietly. She turned toward him. For the first time that night, there was no audience in her eyes. No competition. No history being replayed. Used to men she once knew standing in front of her. Ethan hesitated. Words that had probably sounded perfect in his mind suddenly seemed impossible to say aloud. I did not know, he finally managed. Naomi looked at him calmly. Neither did I. The answer landed harder than any accusation could have. Because it was true. She had never hidden anything. She had never deceived anyone. The truth had existed long before tonight. The only difference was that now everyone could see it. Ethan lowered his gaze briefly. Across the room, guests pretended not to watch while listening to every word. You deserved better than the way I treated you, he said. Naomi studied him for a moment. Then she nodded once. Not because the past had disappeared. Not because everything was forgiven. Simply because carrying anger no longer served a purpose. Richard Bennett approached and informed her that transportation was ready whenever she wished to leave. Several executives respectfully waited nearby. Their future meetings, schedules, and responsibilities would begin soon enough. But tonight was not about business. It was about closure. Naomi thanked Daniel Harper for his kindness. She exchanged a few quiet words with the attorneys. Then she walked toward the elevators at the far end of the ballroom. The crowd naturally parted too. Make room. Nobody asked for her attention. Nobody stood in her way. Ethan watched her go. He finally understood something that success had never taught him. He had not lost Naomi because she became the heir to an empire. He had lost her years earlier, the moment he stopped seeing her value when there was no audience watching. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Naomi stepped inside and turned once toward the ballroom. The city lights shimmered beyond the windows. The music had not resumed. The room remained suspended in the aftermath of revelation. Then the door slowly closed. And as the reflection of the ballroom disappeared from view, Naomi felt a quiet sense of peace. She had not won by becoming wealthy. She had not won by proving anyone wrong. She had won because she never allowed other people's opinions to define her worth. The world had finally discovered who she was. But she had found herself long before that night.